We have one problem player who the DM is giving one more session before he is told to leave. He doesn't say anything unless specifically asked, and when he does answer, he acts really mean and snide about it. In session 0, the DM was going to end the session for the night, so he asked if anyone had any questions before he did so. We all said no questions, but problem player was silent. So he asks, "Hey, problem player, am I good to log off? Do you have any questions or need help with something with your character sheet?" And problem player goes, "Whatever," and logs off. Confused, we just wonder what that was about and plan to keep an eye out during the next session for any other red flags. Now, session 1, he spoke a total of 2 times. Once was the introduction, which went fine, but the second was when he was asked what he was doing at the marketplace, since we were all told we had to look for travel supplies before departing, which was kind of important. He just says, "I'm good," in a huff, and we see in chat that he's doing it manually, instead of role-playing the bartering like the rest of us. The Dungeon Master, since we've noticed and discussed this behind the scenes already, says honestly to the guy, "Hey man, is everything okay? Is it nervousness, or is something stressful happening outside the game? Something we're doing that's annoying you, or maybe something else? I'm just trying to get everyone to join in on the game. You signed up for a roleplay heavy campaign and said that's what you enjoy in a campaign, so I'm just a little confused as to why you're so against it now." The guy huffs again and says, "It doesn't matter. Just let it go." And we push on with the game again. We never heard him speak again for the rest of the 2-hour session. He jumped out of the call the moment the DM said we were stopping for the night, and he didn't even wait for the narration when the DM was going to close the night out. The rest of us talked again, and while I'm fully in favor of kicking him now, the DM wants to give him one last session before taking action. It's not like he's disrupting us until we talk, so... Look, I get it. Sometimes not in the mood for role-playing, but especially with a group that you don't know, I mean, come on, man.
Wait, so let me get this straight. I barely engaged with the story at all.
Yep.
I gave no constructive feedback to the Dungeon Master in any way and hardly communicated my needs.
Uh-huh.
I said only 2 lines throughout the entirety of the session.
I certainly recall.
Well, why am I not allowed to play with you guys? It doesn't make any sense.
Yep. Complete mystery to me, too. I apologize in advance for some details not being exact, as it's been a couple years now since this happened, and for the length, as it is a convoluted story, anything seeming extraneous will hopefully be connected by the end. In this story, we have myself, the Game Master, Sorcerer, Paladin, and Rogues 1 and 2, the problem duo who were also a real-life couple. It is important to some of the context that we played online, and that while myself and the Rogue are in the US, Sorcerer and Paladin are in England and 5 hours ahead of us. Long backstory short, I have a small Discord community and run mostly one-shots from members. This is where I first encountered the Rogues. I had gotten the idea to try a longer game with some of the community, and I got several people interested in running a Pathfinder conversion of an old 3.5 mod I'd tried to run several times over the years, but never finished because of scheduling collapse. It's Expedition to the Ruins of Greyhawk, if anyone's interested, in which the players explore ruins, hunting bandits, uncovering secrets, and stopping a secret invasion plan, and then attempt to drain a minor god of his power and divinity. Since only the Rogues were familiar with Pathfinder, I limited character options for the players to keep the newbies from feeling overwhelmed, and to try and avoid them feeling overshadowed by some of the powerful non-core stuff veterans would immediately gravitate towards. We had a session 0 where we discussed the adventure, hashed out what each player wanted to play, etc. I told all the players that I didn't need a backstory for their characters, but I'd accept most anything they wanted to put together and work it in where possible. I also warned them that the first part of the module was very combat heavy, with little to no answers to a lot of mysterious clues they'd find. But part 2 would start giving them answers and allowed for more roleplay. I let them know that if the grind of part 1 got to be too much, to just let me know and I'd skip ahead to give them some answers and some more room to stretch. Sorcerer and Paladin were experienced with 5th edition and knew my style there, so they're good. Rogues 1 and 2 say they're just happy to play as they've had trouble finding games or good groups to play with. In hindsight, there may have been some red tint to that flag, but yeah, I digress. Since it was a small group, I proposed a rule I called Biff the Understudy, Baldur's Gate reference from the older games, wherein I would make a character 2 to 3 levels below them, but heavily multi-class, so they could be a versatile but less powerful backup that appeared only when a player was absent and everyone else wanted to play. Having a minimum of 4 players is a lot more important in Pathfinder than in 5th edition, and so all the players agreed this was a good idea. We start the first session with another reminder that if part 1 is a slog of combat, then to let me know if they're not having fun with it and they want to skip over to more varied content in part 2. The story opens with the players traveling to the city of Greyhawk to witness the burial of a famous adventurer. On the raid outside the city, they find an attacked cavern, fight some orcs and goblin bandits, and rescue a prominent citizen of the city who tells them the rest of the bandits had run towards some ruins north of the city. Everything seems to go okay, except for some bits where Sorcerer and Paladin needed rules explained due to differences from 5th edition, and the explanations took, well, longer than expected. Things do go well during the second session, but around the third and fourth sessions, that's where things started to go downhill. Rogues 1 and 2 were playing brothers who used teamwork combos to their advantage. Neither gave me any backstory, but would sometimes bring up something minor to add to their characters, and generally, I agreed because it made for a good story. However, at this point, Rogue 1 became very fixated on an army of orcs that were following. I immediately thought it was confusion, since the story told by the quest giver used the word warband in the initial text, and I tried to clarify that no, it was just a small group of bandits they were hunting, and some happened to be orcs. Rogue 1 just stated it was important to his character to hunt down these orcs because of his past, and when I asked him to elaborate so I could work it into the story, he declined and said it wasn't important. I mean, okay.
Orcs. I shall hunt them in the night, plunge my blade into each and every one of their hearts, hunt down their innocent where they sleep, and spill their blood onto their beds. Nowhere will be safe from me.
This seems like kind of a personal thing to you. Is there something you want to talk about, man?
My story is dark and full of terror. You will not want to hear it in its full depth.
No, I'm not playing like an NPC, dude. This is me, the Dungeon Master, telling you I have not heard anything about orcs in relation to your backstory. You know, before the next session, could you just send me a text so that I know what's going on with your character?
Well, like I said, my story is dark and full of terror. And I see no reason for you, especially, to hear it in its depth. I'm the dungeon...
You know what? I don't even see the point of me being here. Then, Rogue One starts an argument later in the same session over where all the orcs I mentioned were. Again, because you said there was an army of orcs here. I tried to explain again that no one mentioned an army of orcs but him, just that the quest giver gave them a small group of orc and goblin bandits as a warband. The quest giver even directly told them it was only around 20 people total, and the player characters had already killed more than a third of them. Rogue One refuses to back down on this until finally reiterating that my character has a hatred of orcs because of his past with them. But again, refuses to elaborate so I can work this into the story somehow. Session ends, everyone says they had a lot of fun, and I tell everyone, again, to let me know if there's something I can change up to keep things in track. Sessions 5 and 6 is where the rogues unpack their red flags, if not outright wave them around at me. 5th session, Paladin had to miss because of work. This became the first appearance of Biff the Understudy. In order for this NPC to be a functional understudy for anyone who missed, I had to build Biff using some options I hadn't allowed them to use. However, this had been discussed and agreed upon by all, since Biff only showed up when someone was missing, only acted in the role of the missing character, and never expressed any opinion, knowledge, or skill unless directly asked by the player characters to do so. The players came down to an enclosed elevator lift and are ambushed by hobgoblins. Rogue One immediately begins arguing before I can even describe a scene fully that he wants to jump down from a lift onto a balcony/ledge above the floor of a chamber before the lift had fully descended, and didn't think, dude, it's an enclosed lift. was a good enough reason for me not to allow that. Then he begins arguing because the balcony I described didn't have an alcove below for him to have cover. I explained the wall above had recesses along the raised portions, so it wasn't protruding from the wall in relation to the floor. And he starts telling me, you shouldn't have said a balcony then, because a balcony protrudes outwards. I apologize for the differences in how they imagined the scene and explain it's how the module describes it, and I didn't think these terms would be that confusing. However, Rogue One, again, would not let this go, and Rogue 2 starts jumping in as well to defend their partner. By the time I get it through to them that I was not deliberately trying to confuse them or change things to deprive them of options, we have been arguing for 45 minutes, and it is well past midnight for Sorcerer, who really had checked out of the session. We speed through the combat, and I end the session by letting everyone know to please ask if the description I give is not clear so I can clarify in advance. Sorcerer had to miss session 6, also thanks to work, so Biff the NPC comes back out. Rogues start complaining that Biff suddenly has magical abilities despite him being heavily armed and armored last session. I remind them of the discussion we all had about Biff and how he uses some options to allow him to function as a spare for anyone in the party and how he's only going to focus on magic stuff this session. Rogues then start asking why it's okay to Biff to use options they weren't allowed to use, and I have to remind them again that this was discussed and they okayed it for this purpose. Minor boss fight ensues. Boss gets good hits on both the rogues and almost kills one, and gets taken down when a spell from Biff paralyzes him thanks to a botched save, and Paladin scores a lucky crit. Rogues express some disappointment that they couldn't flank or surprise this boss. In short, it's because the boss was a higher level rogue that got a basic class feature from Pathfinder, and said it was overpowered of me to give the boss that kind of equipment. Mind you, this was magical equipment the module gave him, and which only played into a single attack on Rogue number 1 in the entire combat. Sessions 8 and 9, Sorcerer also had to miss, but said he was fine to come back for part 2 as we were coming to the end of part 1 of the module. In Session 8, both rogues complained loudly because as they proceeded deeper into the ruins, there were suddenly human clerics and fighters amongst the goblins and orcs, but they just fought to the death and tried to kill the player characters without giving any clues as to who they were. When it becomes clear these enemies were part of some kind of secret mission and had good reason not to identify themselves, they began to berate me, the Dungeon Master, for not giving detailed descriptions of basic unnamed enemies beyond what the module gave. They complained loudly that all they're doing is combat over and over, and I remind them that I told them that part 1 could be a slog of combat, and I left the option open to skip to part 2 anytime if they asked. I directly state that I will skip ahead to where they'd start getting answers to the questions they'd found in-game if this is what they want, instead of feeling frustrated with the campaign as a whole. They backed down and said they want to keep on going with part 1. I think that maybe this will blow over since we just have one more session left in part 1 anyways. Mid-story analysis, let's take a look at this part 1. I do think it's a great idea for DMs to directly tell your players, like, hey, this is going to be the style of this part of the module. Do you want to play through this all the way? Ask them that directly, and check on the pulse of the group throughout the campaign, because their mind can change as things go on. That's a good move that the DM is doing here. Even still, can't save you from the problem with these two rogues. Constant game interruptions to complain about stuff that, let's be honest, really isn't that big of a deal. And I have a feeling it's only going to get worse. Anyway, eyes up. Let's get to the rest of this thing. Session 9, everything turns to crap. Rogue 2 is scouting ahead when she is spotted by the final boss of this first part, a powerful fighter and his young blue dragon partner. The dragon had been hiding and somehow managed to roll higher than Rogue 2's perception, and got spotted just in time for Rogue to react and dodge the breath weapon. Rogue 2 tries to book it back to the others, so I tell them to roll initiative. Now, the tactics of this boss were, as stated in the module, use any free time he was given by the player characters to down as many helpful potions he had on hand before he was engaged in melee combat. As the player characters had decided to regroup in another area to try and ambush him when he came through the closed door, this meant he got time to be fully powered up before they even engaged him, and even gave his dragon some of his own abilities. This is important as it comes up later. Things blow up into another huge argument when the boss finally does enter this room because Rogue 2 stated she was readying an action and then accused me of cheating and trying to steal her turn because I wouldn't let her take a full turn. It's called readying an action, not readying a turn. My God. Rogue number 1 joined in too. Now, quick explanation. There is a big difference in Pathfinder between readying an action and holding your whole turn until a specific moment. And she stated she was doing the first when apparently she wanted to do the second. Rogues 1 and 2 continue to argue and get worked up even after I give them the exact page and location of the rules she was trying to wrongly explain to me. It gets to the point that Paladin is butting in to ask rogues to just leave it for after the session, and only ends when I firmly state that we can either move on or end the session immediately because I am not entertaining this argument any longer. The combat finally resumes. The dragon is killed, and due to poor rolls, both Paladin and Rogue 2 are knocked unconscious by the boss. Rogue 1 is on death's door. Biff switches from support casting to going offensive and ends up being the one to kill the boss after nearly being killed himself. At the end of the session, everyone is alive but beaten, and everyone agrees to do a wrap-up of Part 1 next time as part of the intro to Part 2. The next day, Paladin posts a text message in the Discord recognizing that rules arguments can get heated, and he understands where it came from, but asks that things be argued at that length outside of game because it just delays things, and it drags the games on far too late for him and Sorcerer to comfortably play due to their time difference. I reply and admit it was as much my fault as anyone else's, and state my intention to make sure I'm clear on what the players are intending before I move focus away from them. Rogue 1 responds by posting a wall of text insulting me in just about every possible way and bringing up a number of things he claims I have been guilty of since the beginning of the campaign. And even though he never brought any of this up beforehand, he even started to insult Paladin and Sorcerer at the end of it too, because they sided with me when the arguments started to drag on, for no reason. His grievances and accusations include, but were not limited to, number 1, I repeatedly ignored his character backstory of being captured and tortured by orcs, and I was continuously lying about telling them that they were being followed by an army of orcs. I constantly made fun of them when their characters failed at something. I changed the rules on the fly to suit whatever the bad guys were trying to do. I never gave them proper descriptions of enemies or scenes and then penalized them when they did something wrong. In addition, I would add magical or superior equipment to enemies without giving them clues that said equipment was superior. I deliberately showed them up with a DMPC that I made using rules I forbade them from using, and then stole their agency by letting said character kill the last boss instead of having him stand back and let the players have the kill. I let the new players do whatever they wanted, but wouldn't let Rogue 1 and 2 be creative with their tactics. Because his initial post was full of some pretty offensive insults, it was just full of slurs for neurodivergent folks, just for starters, it violated our community rules and was subject to deletion. I deleted the post and private messaged Rogue 1, acknowledging that I understood he was upset, but asked him to please restate things without the insults so we can try and resolve these issues. He does so, but only barely within the community rules this time. I try to address his grievances and explain the instances where he apparently felt put upon, explaining that nothing was intended as such, and I was sorry the way I acted made him feel this way. In particular, I stress the following. I laugh at dark situations where nothing seems to be going right. It's just me laughing at the absurdity of the situation. I apologize if I made them think I was laughing directly at them. I described things as they were described in the module and told them what their characters would notice on first glance. While there were a number of enemies that had magical equipment, it was nothing that particularly was noteworthy at first glance, particularly in the heat of combat. And the few items that were notable, I gave them specific descriptions of it. I reminded them once again that Biff's construction and purpose had been agreed upon by all of us at session 0, and that he was acting in his agreed upon role, and on his turn initiative, he killed the boss. I asked them in the future to let me know, at least at the end of the session, if I did something they felt hurt them, as most of this could have been addressed and dealt with had I known about it before it all became a crisis. Rogues 1 and 2 responded by accusing me of ignoring their complaints from the beginning and trying to gaslight them by saying I wasn't aware of the issues before. I had to confer with Paladin and Sorcerer because I legitimately did not remember them ever complaining, and in fact remembered them claiming they loved it after each session when I asked how the group felt as a whole. Paladin and Sorcerer say they remember things the same as me and are confused as to what the two rogues are talking about. The rogues continue to double down and began saying my response wasn't actually addressing their concerns and that I was trying to deflect. Thinking that nuances of things weren't being communicated clearly via text and seeing that things were taking days to resolve due to posting times, I requested that we all pick a time and jump onto voice chat to talk this out because clearly things were not getting through clearly for anyone over the text messages. They refused and began insulting me again, accusing me of trying to not deal with things openly because somehow suggesting arranging a set time for us all to meet in the voice chat in the Discord that anyone could join and listen to was not addressing things in a public forum. Their tirade continued past several warnings that their behavior in this manner was not acceptable, and if they couldn't follow the Discord rules, they'd end up getting banned. And right before the ban hammer came down, they accused me of targeting them because they weren't going to join your group of yes men. This whole scenario made me question everything I thought I knew about running games and keeping in touch with my players, because even though in hindsight the red flags were more like red billboards at the time, I couldn't help but wonder how much of this was legitimately my fault. It was months before I felt confident in myself behind the GM screen again, and for the next couple months I was considering giving up running games for the foreseeable future. Paladin and Sorcerer are good friends now, and while I don't get to run for or play with them as often, they've both helped me to regain my confidence as a game master, and now Biff is a joke between us to let us just laugh at this horror story. Sometimes that's all you can do. My god, this was a long one, and while it's not the worst thing we've ever read about, it is one of the most frustrating just because I know exactly what kind of person you're dealing with here. Now, is this person's DMing perfect? No, probably not. I have no idea how their DMing is, I don't play with them. However, outside looking in perspective, it doesn't seem horrible by any means, and they seem to be going out of their way to take criticism on a variety of things throughout their game. On top of that, the mistakes that these people are looking at, we see them all concurrently. But overall, this whole situation happened over the course of what I assume to be many months, over the course of many sessions, and so it's much more spread out. As a game master, you're not going to focus as much on those small things unless someone points them out. The rogues think they've got some big gotcha by pointing out all these mistakes, but they're minor mistakes over the course of 10 sessions. If you wanted those fixed, why didn't you talk about them beforehand? Also, some of those mistakes aren't even mistakes, like expecting the DM to point out every single enemy and say, this one is stronger than you. This one has magical equipment. Like, I'm not gonna do that for every single enemy. Maybe there's some GMs that will, but I'm not one of them, and this guy probably isn't either. Biff is something that I wouldn't pull in one of my games, but like the GM pointed out, the whole party approved him. I also wouldn't allow an NPC to get a final hit, especially on a big boss. I just can't see myself ever doing that, but I understand the situation the GM was in at that moment. A lot of the party were down. This is a near TPK scenario. The GM sees an opportunity to, in a reasonable way, get them out of the situation without killing everybody and takes that shot. Was that a mistake? Maybe, but in the end, I totally understand where their perspective is coming from. I may have done the same thing in that situation. Man, I feel like I got gaslighted. I mean, I'm focusing this whole analysis on the GM's GMing when, in truth, what's the main problem here? It's not the game master, it's the freaking rogues. They are rules lawyering when they barely know the rules. They're arguing in the middle of the games. They're making the whole experience generally miserable. And on top of all of that, their attempt to get the GM to understand their criticism is basically gaslighting. Holy crap. Basically, I feel for this game master. I've been in a similar position myself, and it sucks. It just really sucks, to say the least. That's another super long story in the bag. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, please do leave a like. If you want to see more of our content, then you can check out our Tavern adjacent podcast where we talk about tons of things TTRPGs while also doing a campaign diary. It's linked in the cards. And while you're there, subscribe to Crispy's Tavern to get more of our content right as it comes out. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down into the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment. kinda toxic, to let me know you made it to the end of the video. Hey, by the way, if you have your own horror stories, you can send them to us. Our email is linked in the description down below. Send us your stories for a chance to be featured in one of these videos. But hey, even if you don't have any stories, in essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell. It's a complete mystery to me as well. Yep. I also think this is a complete... Yep.